Good evening. I wanted to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Monday, September 3rd meeting of the City Council. Why don't we start with roll? I don't know where the echo's coming from. Madam Clerk, can you start with roll?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Conley?
Yes, here.
Ms. Flynn?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott? Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Ms. Underhill?
Here.
And Mayor Hardy?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I believe we have a motion tonight to amend the meeting agenda. May I have a motion, please?
I move to amend the meeting agenda to consider item 10B1 before the public hearing on item 10A1 and adopt the meeting agenda as amended.
Second.
Ms. Flynn on the second. Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott? Oh, sorry, absent. Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Council.
Okay. Well, now that the meeting agenda is adopted, let's move on to our proclamation tonight. And today is a special week. We have a proclamation proclaiming September 23rd to 27th as Clean Energy Week in the City of Falls Church. And I believe we have staff in attendance, as well as a guest. Welcome.
Hello, my name is... There we go. Hello. My name is Alexander Diaz. My company, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions Forum, hosts every late September National Clean Energy Week. Tonight, on behalf of my company and on behalf of all of our National Clean Energy Week partners, I am very honored to be accepting this proclamation from the City Council and from Mayor Hardy. Technical difficulties. National Clean Energy Week is a bipartisan celebration of the policies, innovations, and technologies that are powering Americans' homes with clean energy right here in Falls Church, all across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and throughout the United States. Every year, we like to highlight the local policies that city governments and state governments are embracing through mayoral and gubernatorial proclamations. And tonight, we are very honored to be adding Falls Church to our nearly 50 proclamations from city governments all across the United States. And we are honored that you all took the time to celebrate National Clean Energy Week with us. So I'm grateful to all of you, to the wonderful staff at the City of Falls Church, to be celebrating National Clean Energy Week with us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Diaz. I think we also have members of the FC CAN group, as well as maybe ESC members. So thank you to staff and all of our citizen advocates for promoting this. You all want to come up for a photo to receive the official proclamation? Oh, yes. Sorry. Does anyone like to do the honors? Why don't you all stand and then we'll read the proclamation.
Honors, thank you. Whereas clean energy is part of Virginia's energy future, which includes generation from renewable sources such as solar and off and onshore wind. And whereas across Virginia, clean and renewable energy is powering more homes and businesses than ever before. And whereas the Virginia Clean Economy Act, passed in 2020, requires the two largest investor-owned utilities in the state to retire their carbon-emitting electricity and obtain capacity that uses solar and wind by 2050. And whereas Virginia's energy future also includes significant investments in energy efficiency and energy storage technologies. And whereas the clean energy sector is a growing part of the economy and has been a key driver of economic growth in Virginia in recent years, supporting over 97,000 jobs in 2023. And whereas individuals, organizations, businesses, and local government in Virginia must collaborate to support solutions that address America's economic and energy needs in the 21st century and implement the cleanest energy technologies available. And whereas in 2024, the City of Falls Church launched its one-stop shop for community energy action, which allows community members to learn about clean energy alternatives they can use in their own lives, such as rooftop solar panels, electric vehicles, and efficient and electric appliances.
Now therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the week of September 23rd to 27th as Clean Energy Week in the City of Falls Church, and I call this observance to the attention of all of our citizens. Thank you all for being here.
All right.
I also noted today was car-free day in the Metro DC area, so hopefully people got to enjoy options other than cars. Okay, after the proclamation, Madam Clerk, do we have any oaths of office to new board and commission members?
We do not.
Okay, well, let's move on to receipt of public comment. Can you sum up the written comments we received?
Yes, these are the written comments we received since your last regular meeting. On the Bike Master Plan, the following residents wrote to support the plan and suggest project funding timing: Anne Marie Vid of 805 Hillwood Avenue, George Lee, and Jacob Williams. Rosalie Cosbelt provided a letter opposing bike lanes on the 500 block of Great Falls Street, which was signed by Sonia Lil Runk and Joseph Howard, 515 Great Falls Street, Alex and Cindy Mercado, 519 Great Falls Street, Matthew and Caitlin Cash, 520 Great Falls Street, Susan Baker, 521 Great Falls Street, Ira and Tamara Gordon, 522 Great Falls Street and 607 Oak Haven, Victor and Fabienne Mrosca, 523 Great Falls Street, Sharon Valentine, 524 Great Falls Street, Scott and Jed Jackson, 525 Great Falls Street, Chris and Matt Brooks, 527 Great Falls Street, Joseph and Judy Bracken, 529 Great Falls Street, John Lawrence and Marianne Rawls, 528 Great Falls Street, Rosalie and Aaron Cosbelt, 531 Great Falls Street, Marianne Siegel, 532 Great Falls Street, Motion and Melanie Riza, 533 Great Falls Street, Michelle and Scott Deal, 535, 537 Great Falls Street, Ryan and Jennifer Davis, 539 Great Falls Street, and Fred Degnan, 543 Great Falls Street. John Lawrence also provided a graphic to add to the previous letter showing home locations of the signers. Budget comment came from Nicholas Benton, 400 James Court, owner and editor of the Falls Church News Press, asking that the city purchase 2 full pages of the News Press Weekly to keep the public informed, as was the practice in the past. Comments on the greening of Lincoln Avenue project. The following wrote in support of the project and noted their preferred priorities: Arthur Agan of 407B Lincoln Avenue and Catherine Labetti, 615 Lincoln Avenue. The following provided comments, concerns, and suggestions regarding the project: Gretchen Curtin, 921 Lincoln Avenue, John Fritsch, 603 Lincoln Avenue, Garrick Malcolm, 614 Lincoln Avenue, Jenny Nowlin, Andrew Olison, 615 Lincoln Avenue, and Margaret Schwartz, 313 Lincoln Avenue. In other comments, the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation provided concerns and recommendations for the area near Oak Street, traffic concerns and recommendations for the area near Oak Street Elementary. Diane Duggan, 102 Lawton Street, asked that Lawton Street be repaved given recent utility cuts made for the Broad and Washington project. Lori Gregg, 317 East Broad Street, expressed concern about increased traffic in the city and requested a traffic study regarding cut-through traffic on North Cherry Street. Richard Klein asked that a no-through traffic sign at Fire Station 6 be changed to allow access to the public trail. Art Wakely asked for traffic control changes near St. James Church and School. A good amount of comment.
Thank you. Let's move on to receipt of public comment tonight. Do we have speakers?
Yes, and just note that we do put a 3-minute limit on speakers, and you'll get a 30-second warning. To sum up, it'll be a yellow light. And so our first speaker is Craig Day, followed by John Lewin.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Been a few years since I last was here, but just wanted to remind everyone that I'm Craig Day from Fairfax County, part of Falls Church, but I used to live in the city. I promised Mrs. Hardy, Mayor Hardy, a T-shirt for the bike bridge. The bike bridge will be 32 years old. Our own little town of Falls Church, actually made the Park Authority and all the other jurisdictions fund our bike bridge. And this is the last one from the bottom of the box. But anyway, I had promised you that I had one, so I would like to give it to your assistants. And if you can, it's a little bit large, but anyway, but if you find a use for it, that's great. But most importantly, next Thursday, not this Thursday, but next Thursday is the 32nd annual celebration. And we got it built before anyone got hurt. And I would just remind everyone that it's the Citizens Bridge, S apostrophe, those things, those grammatical things are important. And secondly, I'd like to just say that since Dave's here, Mr. Snyder, funny thing happened. The week after we got the bike bridge opened, grand opening, we had to rally together to keep off-track betting parlors out of the city of Falls Church. And, as they say, if you don't remember your history, you're doomed to repeat it again. And we have the Tyson's Corner casino thing floating around. So I would just say that it might be worthwhile to dust off the memories of 32 years ago, how we were able, both Republicans and Democrats, agree that off-track betting parlors in the city of Falls Church are a bad idea. And I think we should be able to share that through COG or other places, but we all need to keep an eye on it because it's like cancer, it likes to sneak back in. So those are my two thoughts, and it's great to see you all, and yay for Falls Church.
Thank you for all your advocacy to get our bridge.
Next, we have John Lewin, followed by John Fritsch.
Good evening. My name's John Lewin. I live at 605A Lincoln Avenue. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. This is in regards to the greening of Lincoln Avenue project. I was at the working session last week, so I know you're all very familiar with that. First off, I'd like to commend my neighbor, John Fritsch, who's done a fantastic amount of work looking at this project from an engineer's perspective and coming up with an alternative, which I hope that you will take a look at, which I think would suit the needs of many of the neighbors that live on Lincoln. My biggest concerns are, one, the amount of parking that will be taken away from the members of the 600 block of Lincoln Avenue, specifically in addition to the Lincoln Park directly across the street. Right now, the current plan looks at about 5 parking spaces for the entire Lincoln Avenue. Mr. Fritsch's alternative plan calls for about 9. And I think that's significant because having lived across the street from the park for 15 years, I can tell you that the most people that go to the park arrive via vehicle, park in front of our houses, which is fine. We totally understand that and utilize the crosswalks. One of the other issues is that the movement of the crosswalk from where it is currently located more toward the intersection with Great Falls, you would have 2 crosswalks within about 100 feet of each other. And by doing that, you would actually remove probably 3, if not 4 parking places for anybody utilizing the park. Next, I wanted to mention that one of the biggest issues with removing parking on Lincoln is that we all have folks that come and service our yards for different reasons. It might be landscaping, it might be cutting, it might be if somebody's coming to our house to replace air conditioning and working on it, etc. They park right in front of our houses. And if we lose all our parking and we're using our driveway for parking, every Amazon, FedEx, UPS truck, every worker that comes is going to be blocking one of the 2 lanes of Lincoln Avenue for anywhere for a couple minutes to an entire day. And I think that's important to note, that if somebody has a large work truck that, say, has a trailer and that can't go in our driveways, we are going to be closing down half of Lincoln for up to an entire day. And I thought that was important to mention. Also, they're building in 8 to 9 feet of greenage in front of what's already our yards. And I'm very concerned about who's going to maintain that because I think that that will end up just being dirt and weeds, and we take a great deal of pride in our yards. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things, as I know my neighbors are here are going to do as well, but I want you to consider those as you move forward with the greening of Lincoln Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. We have John Fritsch, followed by Mike Curtin. Oh, I already got Mike Curtin. Brian Pendleton?
No, Mike Curtin.
Oh, okay, sorry. John Fritsch, followed by Mike Curtin. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to follow up on the work session from last week regarding the greening of Lincoln. During the work session, I heard a lot of discussion about pushing and polling of the needs of the project and how sacrifices need to be made in some areas to accommodate project goals. I live across from Lincoln Park near the intersection of Great Falls and Lincoln. The plan shows that a permanent easement will be required at my property as the sidewalk will encroach into my yard. This encroachment will completely remove a stone landscape wall. This will also potentially remove a large tree in my front yard, something that no one from the city has talked to us about yet. Currently, I have a parking space in front of my house, a stone landscape wall, and a large tree. Unfortunately for me, the pushing and pulling of this project could result in me losing the parking in front of my house, losing the stone landscape wall, and losing a large tree, as well as losing a portion of my property to a permanent easement. For me, the only positive thing coming from this project is a wider sidewalk. Other than that, I'm losing. For one positive, I receive potentially 4 negatives. And the location of my house to the intersection will prevent me from potentially benefiting from any traffic calming, as vehicle speeds will still increase as they approach the intersection to make the light. I've been told that there's not enough room for parking on both sides of Lincoln in front of the park as to not disturb my neighbor's retaining wall. I've measured this location and it appears there would be enough room to provide parking space and still have 2 feet of clearance at the wall. The current plan shows, as John mentioned, 8 to 9 feet of public space between the wall and the sidewalk. Who will be responsible for maintenance of this area? I have asked how much space is needed at this wall, and I've received no answer. I can tell you from experience of living at this address for over 18 years that more parking is needed at Lincoln Park. Some of my concerns and comments were not included in the public comment matrix from the work session, and I feel some of the responses were inaccurate. I do want to thank Councilmember Underhill for reaching out to me and listening to my comments and frustrations. I have prepared a new plan, or a new drawing that shows adjustments that can be made at the park to incorporate all of the consensus items that the current plan addresses, with fewer compromises and less requirement of permanent easements. I have shared this plan with Justine, and I ask that you take it into consideration. I would ask that if staff tells you that something cannot be done, that you challenge them to show you why it cannot. Excuse me, I ask that you not close the door on incorporating upgrades to portions of this plan. For an $11 million project, there are too many unanswered questions and too many unaddressed opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Underhill did share your proposal and drawings with the rest of us, so we're looking at that now.
Now we have Mike Curtin, followed by Brian Pendleton.
Good evening, Council. It's good to see you all. It's been a while since I've been up here. My name is Mike Curtin, and for over 30 years, I've lived at 601 Lincoln Avenue. I've had 3 kids that have gone through the system, school system here, K through 12. I had a business in the city for many years, been very active and invested in the city and its growth over the last 3+ decades. I say that to say that I well recognize that what happens in the city is, and considerations that need to be taken into account on projects are far bigger and far more complicated and complex than how things directly affect me in front of my yard. This project, however, I have to say I'm concerned about the process that has been taken or not taken. In much of the public commentary I've read and reporting from the city staff, there's been talk of there being great consensus about this project. I'm not certain where that came from. What I can say in terms of consensus is that the folks that live on Lincoln Avenue next to me that will be most directly affected by this project do have a great deal of consensus, and that is that this project has not been thought through entirely and is not going to be a positive and accomplish the goals that it sets out to do. That park has been a huge part of our lives here in Falls Church. It was an incredible benefit for us with our kids, and I want to see others in the future enjoy that park as we have. I will say that having looked at that park every day for 30 years, it does seem that the water issues are far less now than they have been ever before. And I'm wondering that if we got a bunch of money in the city here for this problem, and we have a solution in search of a problem. And as we tried to expand this problem, we went from a water retention issue to a larger traffic issue that's still being run by a guy, by his own admission. Tony is a water retention guy, not a traffic specialist or a designer. I do not have that expertise or training, but as John said, our neighbor John Fritsch does. The work that he's put into this is incredible, it's laudable, it's very thoughtful, it's very practical, and I think it's actionable. I think one of the things that, as my neighbors have said, most of the people that go to this park arrive by car. And I think it would be unfortunate to put a ton of money into this project and then make it less accessible to the greater Falls Church community or people who live in Falls Church outside of that little area. So again, as others have, I would very, very much encourage you and city staff to look carefully at what John Fritsch has put together. And it seems that these are options that can accomplish all the goals that the city has set out to do without encroaching on personal property, costing the city more money, and not making that road safer. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Next, we have Brian Pendleton, followed by Marianne Rawls.
Hi, my name is Brian Pendleton. I am the board president for Falls Plaza Condominium Association. I'm here to speak about the possible bike path that has been discussed coming through our property or the property next to us, depending on how the plan goes. You've already received one letter from owners, and the owners finally got together and asked the board to say something officially for the association, and we'd like to let you know that we are against this path going anywhere close to our property. We don't see a need for it. We think that it increases foot traffic where there doesn't need to be. It decreases our security, our privacy, and for those reasons, we are against the plan as it is right now. We are willing to talk to the city and work with you to enumerate the different issues that we have beyond the quick ones that I just said, and try to work with the city to maybe come up with some better plan. But we just feel that any path that comes 50 feet or less between our property, it is just not a satisfactory path for us. And that is it. Thank you. I'd like to introduce this letter.
Thank you.
Next, we have Marianne Rawls, followed by Jesse Curtis.
Good evening. As was already read, I'm on the letter from the 500 block of Great Falls Street in opposition to the bike path. That letter is unanimous. We don't think that 500 block should be in the bike plan at all. But in addition to that, I want to encourage my fellow Falls Church, I want to be on the record on this one. I want to encourage my fellow Falls Church citizens to remain civil during this debate. Last night, someone came to my home and demanded to know why I wanted their family dead based upon my signing the unanimous letter from the 500 block in opposition to the bike plan. Let's keep it polite, folks. Let's keep it civil. This is supposed to be a community, and it's supposed to be a neighborhood. And I haven't taken up my 3 minutes, so I'm going to yield the balance of my time, if I can, to my neighbor, Matt Brooks.
Thank you for your comment. And
You can have 3 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank
Matt
you
Brooks,
all. Yes, ma'am.
for the record, yes.
At 527 Great Falls Street.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your time. I'm here to speak to the bike plan at 500 Great Falls Street. Although it seems partly tied to the 600 Lincoln, I guess there's a greening and we're both on the sides of the park. I've lived in Falls Church now for 20 years and 10 years at the current address on Great Falls. And I think it's safe to say that traffic is way up everywhere. And it's, a lot of people coming from Lincoln now and a lot of people up and down Great Falls, and they're all going this way and that way. So the traffic is definitely increased, and most of the neighbors that were there 5 years ago, a car ran off the side of the road and hit our neighbor's front tree because the roads are already very narrow. So we're all very worried about the kids because the Lincoln Park is a bus stop. And it's already, if you're just trying to pull out of your driveway, it used to be easily, even 6 years ago, you could take a left or a right because the lights worked that you could actually go out. Now it's backed up both ways. I ride my bike everywhere in the city. I'm a consummate biker, and I have no problems navigating the Great Falls to the trail or to other places. But I would worry too, I don't know the exact plan, it just marks, I don't know which side of the road it would be on, but I'm worried about trash cans, I'm worried about it's already narrow and people getting injured, and also people trying to pull out of their driveways and not seeing the bikers, if they're encouraged to utilize this extra. So these are just some more concerns that I have on top of the letter that I signed as well, that I wanted to present to the group and for the record. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next, we have Jesse Curtis, followed by Joyce Migdal.
Hi, my name's Jesse Curtis. I live at 601 West Falls Way. I've been a resident most recently for about 5 years, but I've been in and out of Falls Church over the last 20. Want to note that my first civic action was in 8th grade in Henderson, Nevada, a suburb of Las Vegas, trying to get a bike path put in to make it safer for me and my siblings and friends to ride around. 25 years later, the city actually put it in. So I'm here in favor of the master bike plan. I hope the council appreciate the comments that have been accepted by other supporters. I came tonight to add my voice to the support. I think overall, I know it's still kind of in the early phases, but I think it's a good plan, particularly the transits across north and southwest, and the connections with the trail that come up again, Great Falls. I know that there are neighbors here who don't support that, but I've noticed even just in the last couple of years, particularly on the weekends, we have bikers up and down Great Falls. The bike clubs will come and they're making shifting between sets of trails, and as a driver, I'm very concerned about that, and as a biker, I'm concerned about that as well. So I just wanted to come and provide my support. I like what's there, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that's going into this, and would urge the council to continue to solicit support, solicit comments from the community, but I support the plan and look forward to having it come through. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. We have Joyce Migdal, followed by Alexander Maricola.
I'm Joyce Migdal. I live on West Falls Way, and I was looking at some of the comments last evening about, I saw a long list of people who opposed a bike path on Great Falls, and I noticed I use Great Falls to access the bike path, and I noticed one line in that letter that said, quote, "Notably, the newly renovated bike path can be accessed 1 block away," end quote. And that's why I need to use Great Falls to get to the bike path, because I mean, I don't live there. I don't live right there. I have to use, it's a connector street that crosses it. People on bikes, scooters, it's a key cross street. People on bikes or scooters ride on this road and need to be able to navigate the street safely, whether it's via a protected bike lane, raised crosswalks, speed humps, or other traffic calming measures that result in cars not exceeding our city's desired 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. When I spoke to one signatory of the letter who opposed the bike lane, they agreed, it was just one person, but they agreed that we needed traffic calming to keep vehicles from speeding on Great Falls. They were against a bike path, but they agreed we needed traffic calming. There's a misconception that a bike path on Great Falls would be dangerous. Data shows a well-designed bike path or other traffic calming measures makes a road safer, not more dangerous, for all road users, including motor vehicles. I request that we keep Great Falls Street in the Bike Master Plan. All road users need to be safe. We need to be able to choose safe, sustainable transportation and not be threatened by 1 or 2 ton motor vehicles traveling at unsafe speeds. I've been riding a bike and driving a car for many years here, over 20. Personal experience and data show it has gotten more dangerous on the roads, and we need to commit to road design that protects all road users. If we take Great Falls out of the Bike Master Plan, I fear we won't get funding for traffic calming for Great Falls, perhaps a decade or more. Thank you for your time and your dedication.
Thank you for coming up.
Thank you. We have Alexander Maricola, followed by Dave Gustafson.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Alex Maricola. I live on Chanel Terrace, and I want to talk about a movie that I saw about 5 months ago. It was called Join or Die. It was screened at Meridian High School. About 200 people showed up to come view it. Maybe some of you were there. It was a really good movie about the place that civic organizations and fraternal organizations hold in communities and how they bring us together and provide a lot of useful services for the community. And I think that's very true here in Falls Church. There's a lot of great local civic organizations and leagues. And I think that it's a shame that the city's minimum parking, I know you didn't think I'd bring it back to that, but I got there. The city's minimum parking policy requires that any civic, fraternal, political, private, religious, and social nonprofit associations have a minimum of 10 parking spaces. That's without regard to any square footage. It's 10 parking spaces. If the League of Women Voters set up shop in a closet, it would need 10 parking spaces. If somebody on city council could please explain to me how this makes sense, I am ears wide open. But as far as I can tell, measures like this and minimum parking in general is supported by no scientific study. It's not even supported by any study that's been done in the United States, in the world. And it's especially not supported by any study that's been done here in the city of Falls Church. Now, measures considered by ESC and the Planning Commission are very good first steps. I would love to see that go through. But it is just the first step. More needs to be done. More of these things need to go away if development is to continue here in Falls Church and if the community is going to come together more in civic organizations. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
And finally, we have Dave Gustafson.
Good evening, everyone. Dave Gustafson, 302 West Columbia. First off, thank you very much for recognizing Clean Energy Week. And also I'm just speaking for myself here, not any organization I'm affiliated with, but with the fantastic climate goals that City Council passed in recent years, giving people viable, safe options to get around the city on something other than a motor vehicle is one of the important ways that we're going to get to reach our aggressive but also achievable climate goals. And so I'm here to speak in support of the Bike Master Plan. For, I think, 6 years, I was on Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, 2 as chair. In that time, and before that, I was a journalist for many years. I've covered a lot of traffic deaths. I've seen a lot of carnage. I've talked to people who have lost children and their family members, and I don't ever want anyone to go through that again. I also know, as father of a 9-year-old, I want her to be able to get to school safely on foot or on a bike or on a scooter. And the WNOD trail that we have is awesome, but something that I want to thank City Council for and also urge you to do more of is just create more and more of these connections throughout the city. We know that the Bike Master Plan, as it was in 2015, kind of sat around for a while, but thanks to all of your leadership and Mr. Shields and DPW, we've seen so many exciting things happen in recent years with the Rapid Response Safety Team. And I would say that probably, just from my perspective, the most important thing that this city government could do in the next 10 years is to create a safe path from downtown to the middle school and the high school. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do. So let's figure it out somehow. I certainly understand the concerns, but as our community continues to add more people, we need to find other ways for them to be able to get around safely and in something other than an SUV. So that's why people who do drive should want more facilities for bikes, because that will mean there will be fewer people arriving at all these amazing destinations in a vehicle and taking up parking spaces. Same goes for Lincoln Park. Right now, one of the reasons that people get there by car is that it's an unattractive destination for people on bikes. We've got the WNOD trail 1 block away. I used to live on Great Falls. I have biked in downtown DC for many years. Great Falls is kind of scary to bike on, so please keep making those connections. All ages and abilities, those are very important, and thank you all for your consideration.
Thank you for your comment. Is that it?
Yes, that was our last speaker.
Great. So I know we had a number of speakers talk about the greening of Lincoln and the bike path. The Bike Master Plan is our first item on the agenda, but we do have to get through the report of the city manager to council. So I don't know whether people want to amend the agenda to talk about it sooner, or whether you all have patience to sit through probably about a 15, 20-minute conversation on our budget. I am sensitive to lots of people coming out tonight. Council?
Madam Mayor, I'd suggest we deal with the Bike Master Plan first.
Okay. Okay. Do we have, I think staff heard all the comments on the Bike Master Plan. I know we'll take it up more formally, but do we have any response based on all the discussions and the public comments we received on Great Falls? And then we can get to the actual, because we'll have to adopt changes to the schedule anyway. Well, that's the question, is can we just do it as part of council requests now and then keep the item on the agenda?
So what the suggestion was take up the Bike Master Plan.
As part of council requests, just as any questions we have while we have residents in the audience now, but we'll keep it on the agenda as 10A1 and 10A2. Sorry for the monkey wrench in the schedule.
So what we would do if we switch the order of the agenda, we do have a staff presentation, 1 to talk about the procedural change for the Bike Master Plan, and 2 to talk about the substantive changes since your last work session, just to walk through those changes. That's the staff report part of it. Then we would like a vote on the initiating resolution, and that's, I think, the main action item. And then the referral of the draft resolution. So there would be 2 votes. I would suggest, if you want to change the agenda, do the whole Bike Master Plan all in one swoop rather than sort of in 2 pieces.
Opinions from the rest of council? Okay, well, let's amend the agenda then and take that up first while we've got residents in the audience. Do we have a suggested motion from staff?
You're going to do a motion to amend the agenda?
And take up the
to
10A.
10B1 and 10A1.
Yep.
So that would be, yes, you could do that motion.
Anyone want to try the motion?
I move that we amend the agenda to take up 10B1 and 10A1 as the next item.
I'll second.
Ms. Underhill on the second.
Who was on the second? I'm sorry.
Ms. Underhill.
Thank you. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn? Yes. Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for the flexibility on this.
And would you like me to read the first item?
Yes, we need to move, we're doing 10B1 first, correct?
Yeah, that would be TR 24-34, resolution to initiate an amendment to Chapter 7 of the City of Falls Church Comprehensive Plan to add bicycle master plan.
Mr. Shields?
Okay, and our staff report will cover this and the next item, which is TR 24-30, resolution to amend Chapter 7 of the City of Falls Church Comprehensive Plan to add a bike master plan at the same time. We'll just deal with both of them at once. And so Mr. Stoddard has stood up to the microphone to talk about this item, and I'll turn it over to our planning director, Mr. Stoddard.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Thank you, Mayor Hardy and members of council. My name is Paul Stoddard. I'm the planning director for the City of Falls Church. So this item, 10B1, that's coming up is the first of two items on the bicycle master plan. And this one is about setting the bike plan on a proper course for a comprehensive plan amendment. Of course, to date, there's been a significant amount of public engagement, including obviously newspaper ads, but also yard signs, community meetings, walking tours. One of the things we want to do to make sure that this is following the right procedures to formally recognize this as part of the comprehensive plan is take it down that route, which involves additional engagement with the Virginia Department of Transportation as well as our neighboring jurisdictions. And the action tonight is to formally open that process. So the request is for council to adopt a resolution initiating a comprehensive plan amendment process. That motion is included at the back of the staff report. And of course, this isn't by any means the end of the process. As I said, there's been a lot of engagement to date, and that would continue for several months. And the sequence of that is actually laid out in the subsequent staff report, which is labeled 10A1. So I can pause there if we want to vote on that initiating resolution, or I can continue with the procedural information about the impacts of moving to a comprehensive plan process.
Questions for Mr. Stoddard?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So we've heard several groups of citizens this evening raise issues regarding the master plan. I think one related to the condominium project, the other related to Great Falls Street. So what response can we give to our citizens that are raising those issues? In other words, what are we voting on tonight and what are we not voting on tonight?
Sure. So there's no vote on the actual plan document tonight. Tonight's votes are both procedural. The first is to initiate the plan amendment process, and that's the one covered in 10B1. 10A1 is a formal vote to refer it out to the Planning Commission for their consideration. Staff is already working on the required submittals to VDOT, which alone necessitate an additional approximately 3 months to the planning process. So what's recommended in the referral motion out to the Planning Commission is that you all schedule another public hearing for the end of January when you could take up final consideration on the plan at that time.
Okay, that's important clarification. The second thing I think would be very useful is a commitment from staff and indeed from council to work with our citizens who have raised issues. I think there was an offer from the Condominium Association to try to be creative there to see what we can do to work with them. And I think the Great Falls Street people have raised some issues, and they seem reasonable as well. So between now and January, can we have some discussions to see how creative we can get?
Yes, so in terms of procedures on, first on the route through the condominium association, as has been communicated through the last several work sessions, the expectation is that final design would be done on a block-by-block basis. I know there are concerns about privacy on the site, about the specific routing of the path as well. And of course, right now that's privately owned land, and so the city would have to negotiate for all of that, and obviously routing and treatment of the path as well as the landscaping around it would be part of that negotiation. The expectation is that that would occur throughout the winter and into the spring, and that we would hold another set of on-site meetings in the spring when we have more refined design plans. For Great Falls, that one was identified as a priority route, but in the second batch. So to date, staff has done walking tours for the first batch of routes, northwest, southwest, and the east-west connection. The second set of routes, those wouldn't be taken up for several years, as described in the appendix. But when those routes come up is when staff would do alternatives analysis, share that information through walking tours, develop a locally preferred alternative, and then move into final design.
Right. I think that clarifies the process significantly.
Yes. Yeah, we were unclear on that at the last work session, and I apologize for that. The updated materials do reflect that.
Thank you.
Ms. Underhill?
Thank you. I just wanted to share that I did go to the 500 block of Great Falls this weekend to try to talk to neighbors. Some of the things that were part of the discussion was being on a route on this plan doesn't necessarily mean that a bike lane goes in. And from discussions that I did have with and that's evidenced by Lincoln Avenue is on the plan, as is Park Avenue, where the Great Streets is going to be. And neither of those have bike lanes. They have traffic calming and other measures, better sidewalks. And so this plan can be vast and open in terms of providing ways for children and people of all ages and abilities to get around town safely. The other thing that I talked about with neighbors when I did have a chance to talk to them was about this plan is about connecting islands of isolated neighborhoods or places that have particularly stressful streets. I also discussed that, we've added to the plan that there will be work on a block-by-block basis, and that we are going to engage with neighbors before anything happens. And then the other few things that I talked to neighbors about was that keeping it in is how we get grants for any sort of improvement projects. With that, I do want to say, do we need to keep Great Falls as a priority route, or can we shift Little Falls? I think there's been a big call in the community to have Little Falls as a priority route rather than Great Falls. Would that be a potential switch that we could make?
Sure, that discussion is always up for council, right? Mm-hmm. This is, so what staff has done to date has done a series of engagements. We've heard from different stakeholder groups. We've held community meetings and trying to understand from all those different inputs, what are the priorities that are bubbling up? Of course, it's staff attempting to weigh that, but ultimately that responsibility falls on council when you all vote on the document. Another option that may be available is that Little Falls is already signed as a bicycle route within the city. Today, it's with Sharrows, which are actually fading, but there is a language added into the plan as well since your last work session that talks about the idea of strengthening existing facilities through some operational program. We have a series of them already up and running, but handling Little Falls, repainting the bike box, putting up the Sharrows. If the Sharrows aren't enough, maybe we could look at a climbing lane for the uphill stretches. So there may be opportunities to handle Little Falls operationally versus waiting until its queue comes up at a later date.
Okay. I will say from talking to neighbors on Great Falls, and I'm also happy to talk to you all as well. People who did sign the document were interested in keeping it in the plan, and there were also some people that didn't want it in the plan at all. But the number one priority for a lot of people was making sure that kids can get around safely. And so what I promised to them was, if this were to stay in the plan, we would absolutely engage them in any sort of discussion, and that there are no actual plans right now. Is that correct, that there are no plans now, and we would engage them in discussion and have this same process that we're doing for West Street?
It's correct. So the way we handled the alternatives analysis, which is really the first phase for Northwest, Southwest, and the East-West connection, is staff in concert with our consultant partners looked at the available right-of-way, the nearby land, and came up with several different options for each of those routes. And then we evaluated each of them for safety, feasibility, cost, and only when staff had what we thought was a workable solution did we take that out to the community, as well as all the other options that we had considered. So that was done through a walking tour. We also shared it with the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. And as I said, that first process, that alternatives analysis, has resulted in a preferred alternative, but we're still going out with a refined design for another set of walking tours with those same neighborhoods in the spring. So this is going to be a two-step engagement process, first to identify the preferred alternative, and then to refine that design to make sure it's actually going to work.
And when you say preferred alternative, it's whether it's, I guess, traffic calming, or, I mean, there were 4 different options, and so it's which option the neighborhood residents prefer.
Right. We had, for the first routes, there's a little more space to work with on Northwest and Southwest. So we had considered everything from sharrows and traffic calming up to mixed-use paths and bikeways. And some of those were going to fit and some of those were not going to fit. Great Falls is much tighter than Northwest and Southwest, so the designs are going to look different. We need to actually get in there and look at it before we can say what that's going to look like, but we do know right off the bat that right-of-way is more constrained, there's grade, there's topography. So we already know we're working with a more constrained set of tools, but that's what we would find out when we go into the alternatives analysis.
I believe Great Falls Street is up for roadbed reconstruction in fiscal year 2029. Generally, when we have roadbed reconstruction, we just put things back the way it is. There's no changes.
We're generally looking at not changes to right-of-way. That's correct. We will pursue we already pursue right-of-way if we need it for ADA compliance. That's a given. But if we're looking at changes in lane configurations or right-of-way or curb lines, we tend to avoid that with a roadbed reconstruction unless there's some other reason to do it.
And so I guess what I'm wondering is, if this did remain on the bike master plan and we did find certain traffic calming or whatever measures, sidewalk widening, whatever else, could that be incorporated into the 29 reconstruction plan? Would you want to do everything together, or would those be separate projects completely?
It's a scoping question for the CIP team, and I know that process is about to kick off, so I don't want to speak before that process gets rolling. That might be something to look at as we get either into the fall, maybe CIP quarterly report, or as we kick off the CIP planning process for this round of updates.
I think my final question is, during this process, if Arlington, Fairfax, VDOT come back with changes, you all would incorporate them and then bring that back to us, or how would that process work?
Correct. So the idea is to listen to all of our partners in this, right? It's a regional transportation. It's a regional transportation system. So obviously it has to work for our regional partners, and so we would hear those comments from them, and then we would work to incorporate them so long as they sort of remain consistent with the vision that the council and the community have set around a connected community and providing all ages, all abilities bikeways.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
We have other questions for staff or comments? Ms. Underhill, or Ms. Flynn, sorry.
I guess I have comments more so than questions, although as I kind of make comments, maybe the clerk, if you could pull up I think it's the second attachment to 10B1, the clean bike master plan, and if we can just go to attachment B, which was the page 37 of 41, the priority bicycle routes page that we had talked about during the work session. I would appreciate it. And I guess just to set the table on this one, I think I'm likely going to suggest some line edits to this page, because we're all supportive of the bike master plan. I think we want to make sure that people are getting around the city safely. I think we also still want to be sensitive to the feedback that we're receiving from community members as residents who are kind of intimately familiar with their blocks and sort of how that space is being used, whether it's the 600 block of Lincoln and the Greening of Lincoln project, or whether it's kind of residents along Great Falls. I know in many of our meetings since this started kind of last winter, I've raised Great Falls as concerning, because I think in both the Virginia Tech study, it does show it's a moderate stress as opposed to low stress road, that it's actually higher stress for bicyclists on that road, and some of that goes to kind of traffic enforcement issues and traffic use on Great Falls. It's a narrow street to begin with. It has a high volume of cars. The cars are moving at high speeds. They're not kind of broken up. They have these long stretches where they accelerate, and then, you have vehicle types on Great Falls that aren't even supposed to be on Great Falls, like heavy trucks that are kind of adding to that use. And I think the concern is not only kind of with how the street is being used and how the street is evolving over time and what residents are sort of experiencing as an unsafe street, but that they, have difficulty envisioning it being a safe street to channel cyclists onto. And so for me, the difficulty I'm still having with Appendix B is that it still feels more prescriptive than I think any of us want to be about particular routes, especially now that on page 13, we have the future routes and have added, in response to council's work session requests, more emphasis on Little Falls, for example, more emphasis on North and South Lee or connections to the Oak Street Elementary School, more emphasis on sort of that, West Annandale, Virginia, down to Sharrow kind of area. And so I just want to make sure that because we're doing this as part of a comprehensive plan amendment now, that often takes on additional significance in several years when we go back to these plans and we say, what is it that we're doing next? And oftentimes, the public will hear at that point, well, where were you 3 or 4 years ago when during the comprehensive plan amendment phase, you should have been there at that point in time giving public input into which streets were next. We decided in, 2024 that these were going to be the priority routes for 2028 to 2030. And so kind of given how we've now set this up, I don't want Appendix B to be like overly prescriptive in terms of saying what it is that we are all agreeing to right now for priority routes, as opposed to what it is that's open for future consideration. So I guess I will give some suggestions that my colleagues can take under consideration, as well as staff, but I would feel far more comfortable with the, both the resolution and referring this out if we have more flexibility in Appendix B. So right now, for example, the first paragraph says the appendix identifies 6 new priority routes for implementation. The routes were identified through technical analysis and community engagement. The routes deliver on the planned goals of building a safe, connected bicycle network, and cost estimates provided include final design right-of-way acquisition if needed in construction. And I guess my suggestion for that first sentence would be this appendix identifies several priority routes for further exploration and implementation. The routes were identified through technical analysis and community engagement. The routes seek to deliver on the planned goals of building a safe, connected bicycle network. And then my suggestion for the last sentence would actually be to put it at the end of that second paragraph under priority routes, fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2027, so that the cost estimates, which are actually only estimates for those 3 routes, are addressed in that second paragraph under priority routes fiscal year 2025 to 2027 instead of in that umbrella paragraph. And then as to the priority routes fiscal year 2028 to 2030, we have those 3 routes identified, and I don't take issue with including them or their inclusion, for further consideration. But I do think that we want to give ourselves flexibility as to other routes that are also considered. So my suggestion would be, instead of saying the next 3 routes are 1, 2, and 3, that we say the next routes slated for further consideration, comma, among others, comma, are Great Falls Street, East Broad Street, and Park Avenue between Virginia Avenue and Northwest Street. And then we add a sentence, other future routes will also be reevaluated at this time to determine current priorities. And then we begin a second paragraph with that project design and implementation language that says project design and implementation will follow a similar set of steps to the fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2027 routes, right? Instead of what's being done for the first 3 routes, including, and then before an alternatives analysis, we say including opportunity for public input, an alternatives analysis, selection of a locally preferred alternative final design and implementation. And then in the last sentence, public engagement, including neighborhood meetings and walks, will be included in the design process for any routes the city at that time decides to pursue, so that we have the opportunity to kind of determine what is that next batch, while actually, saying there are things we're looking at, there are definitely things that are at the top of the list, but we've also included, in the future routes map, other things that may actually become priorities by the time we're looking at it in fiscal year 2028. So that would be my suggestion and request of my colleagues. Thank you.
Do we have responses to Ms. Flynn's suggestions?
I was doing my best to follow them. I would agree with everything she said, and I don't have any comments at this time.
Madam Mayor, I would tend to agree.
I'd agree.
Okay. So maybe we can follow up on the specific wordsmithing, or Ms. Flynn can follow up over email. Any other comments on this one?
I just wanted to get feedback from staff on that.
But I think that's consistent with what we meant to capture in terms of the commitment to public engagement and how it's included at every step of the process. I think what I imagine we would do is that maybe before we sort of let loose a sort of consultant team to look at those, we could come back to council and sort of reaffirm the 3 priority routes. I guess my caution about it is that it did take somewhere between like 6 and 9 months just to narrow down on those priority routes. And I know there were several folks that were upset when their routes were not included, because some of these did come up at several of the public engagement events. So I'm a little bit anxious about the balance of time, but I think if the expectation were that the sort of reaffirmation were a relatively quick process, I think that's certainly workable.
Okay.
And I would say my rationale for kind of putting the flexibility there is that I do think, for all of the public input, that our discussions were really centered around the first 3 priority routes. And I think that, when we are adopting a bicycle master plan, we kind of didn't get into as much conversation on those next 3 routes. And so even though you're saying, you kind of narrowed it down, I don't think that you kind of had the same level of feedback from council as to which should be those next priority routes, and should it be Great Falls versus Little Falls, or should it be, X Street versus, doing an Oak Street connector after we get the second, the schools, the path to the secondary schools and path done. And so I would like to see sort of where we are funding wise, what it is that we've accomplished, what connections we've succeeded in making, and like what makes sense of these group of routes to determine kind of where we put our energy in for this second phase of these connections.
Okay, if I can attempt to sum up, because I think some of this was kind of detailed and technical. So for, I guess, the residents who came out tonight or watching from home and wrote to us, tonight we are actually not voting on the bike master plan. We are voting on initiating resolution to include it as part of a comp plan amendment process. I know that sounds like a whole bunch of technical jargon, but that moves out the timeline for 100 days. And so we will take this back up kind of late January 2025. So that's kind of the first pause. I want to make sure people understand that. The second, I think, the bike master plan is 30-some pages, and the fact that we are spending so much time on getting it right in the appendix means we are actually caring about the details, because the details do matter. So I appreciate staff, I appreciate my council members for kind of digging into the details of how the routes go, what's next. But the route's not getting, or the plan's not getting approved till January 25. The details, the block-by-block discussions that we're going to have on the first 3 routes will take some months to get through. So I know we heard concerns tonight from the members of the Falls Plaza community, members from Great Falls, but we assure you, and we are committed to working out the details at the neighborhood level. So that should be the second assurance, is that those things will happen before anything is finalized. And again, hopefully the fact that you see us actually digging into the details in the appendix, and I think I want to make sure that staff understands that we really appreciate all the work that's gone into the meat of the bike plan that's thus far, and we really are on the wordsmithing of an appendix at this point. And I guess the third thing is, my question is, what exactly is the implementation schedule for the first 3 routes? So once we get to January 2025, we approve the bike master plan, what does the schedule look like then for northwest, southwest, and then the secondary route?
Sure. So the schedule for moving forward remains the same as what it was when we presented last month. The staff approach will be, even though this is going through the comp plan process, which won't wrap up until the earliest January, staff still intends to request final design funding through the budget amendment, which will come before you in October. We would use that additional funding to, as we said, refine the designs at a block-by-block basis, pay for the necessary walking tours that would need to happen. Those would likely happen in the spring. Assuming that that goes well, we could then look to implement those routes northwest and southwest, that because those don't require additional public right-of-way, those could likely proceed to implementation hopefully in the fall of 2025. The condo association, because it does require right-of-way, probably wouldn't go to construction until at the earliest the spring of 2026.
Got it. So hopefully that's also some assurance for the community who's watching, is that the timeline, while we are looking at some votes tonight, it's not, again, voting on the bike master plan itself, but just to kick off the comp plan amendment process. The vote will be January 2025, and then the implementation schedule is starting in spring 2025, and probably not even starting construction until almost 6 months or a year later after that, if I sum that up correctly.
It is. And there are actually 2 votes tonight out of the 2 different staff reports. One is to formally start the process, and then the second is to formally refer the plan document with those edits made tonight to the Planning Commission for their formal consideration, and to put them on that clock for the January response. And then just the other mechanic thing I'll throw in there is that this was advertised as a public hearing, and staff's recommendation is that that go ahead and proceed tonight, even though there is no adopting action on the plan.
Great. With that, yes, Ms. Connolly.
I just want to make sure that the letter from the Falls Plaza condo that was passed to us as a printed letter, that it's here, that it does, you got a copy as well? Okay, that it is shared as public comment and shared with staff, because it's a long letter with a number of concerns, and I think it's important to start to address those immediately. And to the residents of Great Falls, I do appreciate you coming out and sharing your concerns. And I think what Ms. Migdal said is really important to remember, is that we're trying to make this safe for everybody. And because it's included in the bike master plan doesn't mean there's going to be a giant bike path down the middle of the road. It really has to fit into safety for everyone: pedestrians, drivers, walkers, residents. And Great Falls Street is a busy street, and I know it's gotten much busier. And we heard from other residents in the community on Cherry Street about their concerns about more increasing traffic. So that's all part of something that is the bike master plan and is not the bike master plan. So it's a great big, ball of traffic and people.
Thank you. Well, let's go ahead and open up this for a public hearing. Are there any additional public comments on this? Of course. Welcome back.
Thank you. This has been very enlightening, and I appreciate the dialogue. I wanted to add one thing about Great Falls Street, which has not been mentioned here. It's an emergency vehicle route. So that just adds to the whole conflagration of what folks are looking at.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Come on up, Mr. Brooks.
Thanks again for some more of the time. So on the plan, it shows the trail in green on Great Falls, but it doesn't, maybe somewhere it was showing particular, so I guess in the future, we'll discuss it at the neighborhood level, like you said. And then, is the plan for the people of Falls Church, is it for the McLean people too? Is it for, I'm not sure if that's part of the plan, like who it's for. And then also, I'm respectful of her concerns, and I wonder where she's at, where it can't work, that she can't access the trail. So I guess we'll have those discussions in the future at a more in the weeds level. Okay, thank you.
Yes, the details do matter. We hear you. Any other public comments on this one? Okay, we are going to close the public hearing. And if I got the order right, we have to take up 10B1 first, which is the resolution to initiate the amendment to the comp plan, and then we go back up to 10A1, correct? Okay.
So I move to adopt TR 24-34.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Underhill on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, council.
Okay, now we will go to TR 24-30.
Madam Mayor, I move,
Need your mic on.
I move approval of TR 24-30
To move to refer.
and move to refer TR 24-30 to the Planning Commission, schedule a public hearing for January 27, 2025, and advertise the same according to law.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Underhill on that second.
Madam Mayor, just to make sure, we held a public hearing on, let me ask the city clerk, did you deem it as a public hearing on both these action items or on the first one?
There was an advertised public hearing on TR 24-30, which was the bike master plan before it was a comp plan amendment. So that was the public hearing we held. The first resolution does not require a public hearing.
Okay.
And I would just ask for discussion on the motion that I know Mr. Stoddard reflected that the reason that I brought this up is because it is getting referred out as a document to the Planning Commission at this point in time. And so I'm not looking to resolve, the second batch of priority routes or get into discussion of them at this time, but I do want, the overall flexibility to be in that second batch. And so to the extent I need to move to amend to make sure that we're referring this out with my edits as proposed, I would do that now if I have a colleague who seconds that, and then I'll follow up in writing as I had them on the record to make it easier for staff. Thank you.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment. Would you?
I would accept that as a friendly amendment, yeah.
Yep.
Do we need to vote on the amendment? Ms. Gillette, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, if you could please vote on the amendment.
Well, I think we would need, if this is going to be a formal vote on the amendment, I think we're going to need a little bit more. I think we took away kind of the point to add flexibility. Kind of my takeaway was specifically in that appendix to add the concept of those 3 streets and others.
that was, is that kind of the main point? Because if that's the main point, we can sort of take that away and incorporate that in. I don't think that needs a formal motion. If that is the view of the council, you'd like that additional, sort of that expansive and others added to it.
I think you got head nods up here that
Now, I know your description was longer than what I've just summarized, and so that's where I'm pausing, because if there's other nuances that I missed,
No, I don't
that
think
were
that there,
important,
yeah, I
then
don't
we
think
should
that there are
articulate
many as nuances. I think in the umbrella paragraph, it was talking about 6 new priority routes. So I wanted to make sure that we were identifying 6, but recognizing that there were other priority routes that are now on the map of priority routes for future routes that we may actually want to prioritize above the second batch of priority routes. So I just want this referred out in a way that captures that, because it came back to us from the work session, in my view, not fully capturing in writing what it was that we sought to capture in the appendix, since it is the only place in the document that actually lays out where it is that we are seeking to focus our energy next.
Just to throw it out as a way of getting that sort of public, that public transparency, what we might be able to do is direct that, staff would reaffirm those routes with council prior to starting the design. So not an expectation that we would sort of repeat the sort of year-long master plan process, but it might be something that says, some sort of message from staff to the council that communicates, we're planning to start on these 3 priority routes pursuant to the comprehensive plan. So sort of making that known, but not necessarily bringing it up to a sort of a long process, but certainly making it known and transparent.
Madam Mayor, I think this is now getting confusing enough. I would suggest we maybe take a few minutes, have Councilmember Flynn give us a track changes version, put that in front of us, and then we can vote that up or down. I think this is getting too confusing at this point. The staff seems to be raising some questions about it, so could we ask for like a 5-minute recess, and you could do track changes and you could show them up there? Can you do that?
Can you do that in 5 minutes? Because, I think the general sentiment was that staff heard the desire for more flexibility and more public input in kind of determining the next round of routes. I guess I was comfortable with letting staff take that direction and Ms. Flynn sending it offline. If we don't need a formal amendment, I guess I'd rather just...
I would be okay withdrawing the motion to the extent that the document, when it gets referred out, captures this discussion and doesn't get referred out as the current Appendix B.
Is that a commitment we can get from staff, that we can update Appendix B to reflect the sentiment of Ms. Flynn's comments?
If my very short summary did capture kind of the main thing that you wanted, with you wanting that both in the introductory paragraph and then in that 27 to 28, the second 3, then I think we understand it. And the reason I was getting cautious about a motion is because your description was much longer than that if there was a motion in there, there might be things in there that we weren't really, the whole council didn't fully understand. That was my concern. But if those things, I think we can follow up on that.
And obviously this comes back to us in January 2025. But I understand the sentiment to want to refer it with the right sentiment behind it. Sorry, Ms. Gillette, are you trying to speak?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. I think I have 2 comments. One, the very cleanest way to do it would be to bring it back to the next Monday meeting of the City Council with the language in it, so as to avoid confusion as to what the flexibility is supposed to achieve. However, if you would prefer to vote tonight, then I think amending the motion that's been made, where it says move to refer TR 24-30 to the Planning Commission, if someone could remake that motion to add as amended by Councilmember Flynn from the dais, and then we would have direction to do that. Staff would undertake that on its own. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette. I like the suggestion of amending the original motion, if Ms. Flynn was comfortable withdrawing the amendment.
Yeah, I'm comfortable withdrawing my motion.
Okay. So who made the original motion? Now, was it? Was Mr. Snyder, you made the original?
Councilmember Snyder.
Yeah, why don't you restate the motion that you're recommending, city attorney?
Sure. In the first section before the semicolon, move to refer TR 24-30 to the Planning Commission as amended from the dais by Councilmember Flynn.
Right. And schedule a public hearing for January 27, 2025, and advertise the same according to law.
Correct.
I make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
So the first motion is gone, and this is the only motion on the table. Okay, thank you.
And the amendment was also gone.
Yeah, I withdraw any motion prior to what I've just made. And do we need to have a public hearing on this?
That was the public hearing we had originally, right?
Yeah, and you wouldn't. No, this is starting it over, yeah. The public hearing will be January 27th.
No, but tonight, I think is the question from Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, you opened and
We
closed
already had the public hearing, that was sufficient.
Yes,
Got
ma'am.
it. Okay, so we have a motion and a new motion and a new second. I think we're ready for roll call then.
Yes, Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, council.
And,
Thank you, staff.
Madam Mayor, it's just my hope that on January 25, we're not going to have a repeat of tonight, that we can work with our citizens and resolve things. And I think we've made a good faith effort to take account of all of our citizens' interests, including moving forward with transportation reform, retrofitting a car-centric community is pretty hard to do, and I think we're in the process of doing that. So thanks to everyone involved, and we will be meeting with interested citizens.
Ditto, thank you. Thank you, staff.
Thank you.
Okay, so we did amend the agenda. So before going on to the business of the agenda, I think we wanted to go back to the city manager's report, if I've got that correct.
All right, well, thank you, council. And so the manager's report is rather lengthy tonight, so for those who are here for the Bike Master Plan, I think you'll be pleased with that change to the agenda. The main thing we'd like to do during the manager's report tonight is have our finance director, Kieran Bawa, provide you with our year-end financial report for FY24. And that will probably take about 10 to 15 minutes in terms of the presentation, and likely there'll be some discussion after that. Before we get to that, however, I did want to note just two other things in the city manager's report, and then a fourth after the year-end financial report. First, I want to note the appointment of Megan Dotzler as our incoming library director for the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library. Ms. Dotzler will be joining the city on October 7th. We had a very comprehensive recruitment process for our library director. Under the city charter, the city manager shall consult with the library board on this appointment, and we did that. We had a interview panel that included members from the library board as well as directors on city staff and an outside library director. Ms. Dotzler will be joining us from Arlington County, where she's the head of youth services at Arlington Central. But she has a long career in the library profession, and she brings, I think, really solid and deep knowledge of running a library, as well as a dual master's degree in library sciences, but also a very welcoming and very dynamic personality that really puts people first. That was, I think, a very apparent thing in getting to know her. So we look forward to welcoming her to lead our library on October 7th. And the second thing I wanted to note is the Virginia Municipal League has given an innovation award to the city for our public communications associated with the East End Area Plan. And the VML will give us this award at their upcoming conference in front of all of our colleagues across the Commonwealth of Virginia in October. But I want to just express appreciation for the good work of Emily Bazemore, who led our staff efforts on our public communications and our engagement with the community on the East End Area Plan. And also thank the members of the Viet Collective and so many members of the community who really got deeply involved in that plan and worked with the city to have a plan that I think represents the community's aspirations and vision for the future of the east end of the city. So wanted to celebrate that. And then lastly, after our year-end financial report, which Ms. Bawa will give, the city attorney has asked for just a moment during the city manager's briefing to provide an update on Conflict of Interest Act work that we're doing as a city. Ms. Bawa.
Good evening, Mayor Hardy and members of the council.
Welcome, and thank you for the flexibility in the agenda change. I realize it makes you stay later, too.
I got time for dinner, thank you. We have for you the fiscal year 2024 year-end report. I do want to start with a comment that this was discussed at the Budget and Finance Committee on Friday. There were some good questions and thoughts, and we built on that, and there is a little bit more information here, and we also have the year-end ARPA results here. So we will cover fiscal year 24 results of operations, and I would like to note these are preliminary reports and unaudited and are subject to change. The auditors are in the midst of running their work here. We will look at how these results impact the fiscal year 2025 projections, and a look at our fiscal year 2024 year-end fund balances. We covered even earlier on Friday, and we'll take a quick look on the revenue share and the year-end funds, the uses that the staff has come up with a small list, and that will build into this budget amendment next month, and then an ARPA update. Moving along, on slide number 3. So overall summary, we ended last fiscal year with revenues over budget by $5.3 million or 5%, and expenditures under budget by $714,000, and minus the $107,000 in carry forward requests, it would result in a net impact of $5.9 million net of permit revenues. That's the overall results. The next slide, digging a little bit more into the general fund revenues. This slide shows the tax revenues, and the net line overall, the bottom line, is they came in 2% over budget. And compared to the budget, almost all revenue categories exceeded the budget target except for one. And I'll quickly highlight each of them since these are our key economic indicators. So personal property tax came in almost 8% over last year with about 400 new vehicles from developments. Sales tax was almost at budget target and 8.6% over last fiscal year, with online sales increasing by 16% due to construction activity. Meals tax are strong with 11% over budget and 12.2% over last year. The hotel tax, the transient occupancy tax, is above budget by 16% and above 2023 by 17% with opening of 2 facilities. And other local taxes saw a minor decline overall, with cigarette tax and recordation taxes seeing some downward activity. The recordation taxes are projected to grow with pick up soon with the sale of the units at West Falls and the retail condos. In addition to these tax revenues, the next slide, slide number 5, shows other revenues, which include licenses and permits that we get from some residential projects and then some major constructions, and they came in over the budget by $600,000. Charges for recreation and athletic programs continues to grow and come in almost 10% over budget and 9% over fiscal year 23. The big increase that I would like to highlight is in the city's investments that earned revenues exceptionally high levels. with the high interest rates out there. And in '24, we budgeted them at about 2%. And in '25, we budgeted them at almost about 4% and proposed in the budget to use those for one-time needs. Slide number 6 this chart shows the local tax revenues and their actual growth in 2024 in comparison to how we set the budget targets for fiscal year 2025 budget. So at an aggregate level for these tax key revenues, indicator revenues, we would need to realize a growth of 7.1% to meet our budget target of 29.6 million. Sorry, that is the actual, and the budget is 31.7 million. So we need to realize a 7.1%. And I would just like to remind the council that fiscal year 2025 projections, when they were done during the time of the budget, were definitely bolstered in anticipation of revenues from West Falls and the Washington and Broad businesses. Sales, meals, business license, and other taxes will need to be closely monitored against the projected growth due to increased development activity. We do have an appendix way at the end, which provides a separate chart for each of these key economic indicators that show a 10-year history of budget versus actual for each of them and a projected target for 2025. These charts are normally presented twice, once now and then again in December when we do our revenue projections for next year. So we do plan to bring those, revise those and bring those up. It's interesting to see the patterns. So for that reason, I've put the charts in there for people for interest, and would interest of time would not go over each of them now. Looking at slide 7, it shows that a total of $993,000 is needed to comply with the unassigned general fund balance policy target of 17%. The general fund revenues in fiscal year 2025 are $119.3 million, which increased by almost $6 million over fiscal year 2024. And 17% of that equates to $993,000 to meet this policy target. Since we're talking fund balance, the next chart shows, the next slide on page 8, provides a summary of the general fund unassigned fund balance over last 15 years. The green and the red lines show the floor and the target of the current fund balance policy thresholds that we have, 12% of floor and 17% of the target. And at the end of fiscal year 24, just like we saw in the previous slide, we need the unassigned fund balance is $20.2 million, which is required to meet the policy target of 17%, and about $993 would be required to meet that, and then maintain fund balance at 17%. And the remaining $4.5 million is shown in the light blue texture chart. That's the remaining portion of the surplus on the top of the bar for fiscal year 2024. I'll move along. Since we're talking fund balance, I'll take a quick second to talk about the capital reserve projections. In slide number 9. So this chart shows the city's capital reserves, the recent summary and the projections for the next few years. There is $21.7 million at the end of 24 that's projected in capital reserves, and 2024 additions. There are two columns, the drawdowns and the additions. So the additions in 2024 include the $8.4 million from Virginia Tech, and then $4.7 from the West Falls land lease, and $962,000 that was transferred to the reserve after 2023 surplus was appropriated. And in 2025, the drawdowns include $9 million for CIP projects and debt service, $3.7 million, and about $875,000 for infrastructure maintenance. I'm going quickly and happy to take any questions at the end. The next slide, slide number 10, is a summary of the calculation for the revenue share approach that we have followed with the schools over the last 5 years. So general fund tax revenues came in 2% over budget, and that dollar amount is $1.89 million after accounting for the unassigned fund balance policy target. That leaves a balance of $897,000 and equally split between the general government and schools. The share is $449,000 for each. Slide number 11 shows the revenue share history. And in 2022, you'll notice that was the recovery after the COVID, a major recovery. 2021 had some, but 2022 had a larger recovery, and interest rates were kind of beginning to be high, and the fund balance policy needed at that time was $769,000. But we're seeing the impact of the investment income more in fiscal year 2024, where we had budgeted our tax revenues, kind of seeing what the trends are better, but the investment income came in much higher. So switching over to general fund expenditures, now on slide 12. This chart shows general fund year-end performance for more than 15 years. There was a noticeable drop, as you'll see, in fiscal year 10 through 12, when we had the last major economic downturn, with the recovery starting in fiscal year 13 onwards. The red bar is the general government piece, and the green bar is for school board transfers, and the purple bar on top shows the debt service, which has increased since 2018 onwards, when we issued the debt for major projects, including the high school, city hall, and the library. Slide number 13. So zooming into the general government operations, this chart shows expenditures over 10 years. The purple portion way on the top is the WMATA subsidy. The brown portion in the middle is the interjurisdictional contracts that we have with Arlington, Fairfax, etc. And the red portion shows the remaining general government discretionary expenditures. And the blue line shows the personnel cost, which increased for the first time in fiscal year 22, after remaining mostly flat from 2016 onward till 2021 for almost 6 years. So then we have a year-end summary for the general government side. The revenue share portion of $449,000, along with other general fund revenues, $3,423,000 that we saw on slide before, along with the underspending of $607,000, brings net available to $4.5 million. And the next slide shows presents some options and some needs, actually, for the use of these year-end funds. The top portion is one that I would definitely like to highlight with CIP project shortfalls. The greening of the Lincoln and the community center HVAC, both project updates have been brought to council, and the gap has been discussed. Annandale and South Maple intersection improvements, to meet a grant match requirement, we need $190,000. And then there are two unfunded projects in CIP. One of them is in CIP, the Fellows Park construction at Fellows property, and the other one, the bike master plan, the route to secondary campus, has been discussed and earlier. However, these are two projects, and in the near future, I want to say we don't have any plans on those quite yet. So the top portion being the portion that we will bring as part of the budget amendment, upcoming budget amendment in October. And any use of these funds, like I said, requires city council to vote, so that would be part of the budget amendment that we bring. And school staff is still in the process of prioritizing their one-time needs, and they did present their year-end and their fund balances for year-end at the Friday's meeting last week. That sums up the year-end, and then I'll switch over to ARPA funds. So the city received a total allocation of 18 million in ARPA grant, and of that, 17.89 million has been appropriated to date, leaving 116,000 in unallocated funds, which of course will be addressed as part of the upcoming budget amendment. And as of September 15th, the city has expended 12.49 million and obligated another 3.3 million, leaving a remaining unencumbered balance of 2.2 million. So these funds need to be encumbered by December 31st, 2024, and expended by the end of December in 2026. The next chart, 18, shows the breakdown of the unencumbered funds, the 2.2 million, by project. And staff is working on ensuring that these funds are going to be obligated in full by December 31st, 2024, and used for funding projects that are ready for implementation. That's the report in a nutshell. The next steps include a budget amendment in October with 2 readings of the ordinance, end of October and early November. And we plan to bring the first quarter results for this fiscal year and a review of the financial policies in the November budget and finance, followed by fiscal year 2026 revenue projections, the first stab at them on a joint meeting between the school board and city council on December 2nd, and the city council anticipated budget guidance from city council on December 9th. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Bawa. I'm sure we have questions for you. Who wants to go first? Or maybe we don't. Ms. Lynn?
I had a few questions. Can you shed any further insight just into the BPOL business license tax sort of numbers not coming in sort of as high as projected, and what it means for your projections for fiscal year 2025, where I think it had shown maybe a 15% BPOL growth, but we are apparently, sliding in terms of the BPOL return. So I just wanted to know kind of further your thoughts on that.
So one thing I do want to note on BPOL, and I'll try to explain, this is technical. In fiscal year 2023, the BPOL numbers were a little bit higher compared to what was accounting for what was the building activity for BPOL in 2023, because they had fast-paced the collections. So there were some back. So that's why 24 looks like it's kind of down compared to 23, but it actually isn't. So, and we kind of knew that at the time of doing the budget projections at that time, because we had talked to the commissioner's office, and these BPOL projections were done as a small fiscal task force with Commissioner of Revenue and the treasurer and finance team and the city manager's office. So it is a big lift. However, with the sale of the new construction that is going on, it's expected that this number is going to grow for 2025, but will it meet the 15%? That remains to be seen. And this is one of those categories that the deadline is March 1st. We're not going to know this, and we're not going to be able to guesswork with this number. We're just going to know this in the third quarter.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Sure. And then I know the staff report talks about sort of the currently completely unallocated $116,000 in ARPA funds. So of the 18 plus million, the chart in the staff report shows the 17.88 because it's missing that 116,000 from like anywhere in terms of any allocation. Do you have any sort of preview as to where staff is thinking about potentially allocating that $116,000?
Two projects that are ready for implementation, one of them being the community center HVAC project, so we can work with the funding that way so that funds can be encumbered before December 31st.
And then I guess my last question sort of comes back to some of the ARPA money that is yet to be encumbered by the end of the year. I still, would ask staff, both in terms of the ARPA money and then the budget surplus, to think about whether it makes sense for any of that to be going toward what are now our anticipated sewer costs. And part of this, in my mind, goes back to, ARPA money as infrastructure sort of focused money, and sewer, broadband, and water as sort of essential services. And in my mind, one of the reasons that we don't put sewer debt up for a referendum is because it is an essential service, and you shouldn't have residents be able to vote down what our sewer needs. And so in my mind, where we do have funding and we have both surplus revenue or potential ARPA revenue, I know that you have modeled out sort of how that utility fund would work, but it does seem to me that it would make sense to continue to think about whether or not we should be routing funds into that sewer purchase agreement or kind of the longer term sewer costs, as opposed to treating that, largely as sewer debt. More of a comment then.
Yes, we do plan to revisit that at the upcoming budget amendment and when we bring the agreement with Fairfax, so the funding model, so, yeah.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Connolly?
I just want to say thank you, Ms. Bowell. We did have a very robust Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday, and most of us were there, where we talked about a lot of these things. One of the things that we haven't talked about is on attachment B of the staff report, and where we have the meal tax and then the sales tax, and just where that is all coming from. And if you look at how many restaurants we had in 2019, we have the same number of restaurants in 2024, and that just is so interesting because it seems like we have so many more restaurants now than we did before. And I know a lot more are opening, and the meals tax has increased a lot. So I think that is one of those things that comes with growth, that as we talk about more traffic and more people, it also brings us more people coming to our restaurants and more revenue for the city. And I really just want to say how important it is that we are growing, and that's a good thing. Sometimes growth gets cast as a bad thing because it's more crowded or more dangerous, but I do feel like this is a really good example of why growth is a good thing.
And inflation is another factor, right?
Inflation is another factor, which maybe that's going down, so we just have to keep growing. And then the same with the sales tax, that there's a lot of sales tax from groceries, but there's a lot of sales tax from online sales as well, even more from online sales than from groceries. So that's another thing to keep a handle on. So as we go forward, I know that tomorrow night the school board is looking at what their priorities are going to be. When will we look at what our priorities are going to be? Is that now or in the next month as we pull all this together? Because we have our list of unfunded things.
So we on the council schedule is, we're planning to talk about that on October 21st at your work session.
Okay, thank you.
Sandra Hill?
Just a couple quick questions. If we did end up with, so we have a budget surplus this year, if we had a budget shortfall next year, would that mean we would dip below the 17% that we have in our coffers? Is that where the money, we would make up for the shortfall?
Well, there's a lot of scenarios that could play out, but that's the reason you have an unassigned fund balance. So if we had a shortfall, the way it would play out is we would begin to know that probably by the first quarter financial report or certainly by the second quarter financial report. And so we start taking measures to reduce spending in response to that. If the shortfall is in a dramatic recession scenario where you need more time, that's where unassigned fund balance comes in to cover you and really give you more time to reset your cost structure so that it is aligned with what revenues are.
Okay, but that could be a potential place where we use money from to make up for any sort of projected shortfall. I guess following up on the WMATA issue that we had earlier this year, do we need to replenish the coffers for WMATA as well? Is that that's something that we need to consider in this budget too?
Yeah, I think as part of our discussion on the 21st is to look at risks and exposures that we have and think about those in the context of this opportunity and how we can use this surplus to mitigate those potential risks. And I think that would be an important part of the discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot. I'd like to call your attention, Ms. Balwa, to slide number 9. So, looks like we're pretty much eliminating the capital reserve between now and 2030, and explain to folks why that's not an irresponsible thing to do.
So the capital reserve policy calls for it to be 5% of the city's assets or 3.75 million, whichever is lower. And in our case, it's the 3.75 million. So we were targeting with the current CIP that was brought, the 6-year CIP, that we end up with a 3.75 million balance at the end of 6 years. However, that accounted for the 1.9 million back from the Virginia Village. And this is revised to show that we're not getting that back quite yet in that window. And so the next step would be to bring the CIP back to council, and every year, every 2 years is a adjustment CIP, and every other year is a major CIP. So since we ended up adding a bit much of projects this time, I think the next time the CIP review would be to see the project readiness and the projects that belong and the funding, aligning with the funding and seeing if there is too many projects that cannot be achieved, and coming up with the appropriate timeline and the funding request. So to answer your question in a nutshell, we should be looking at this as part of the next CIP development and part of the fiscal year 2026 to make sure that we're not drawing down all our capital reserves.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that we don't want to do that. So we'll have to look at this. I mean, I have other questions about this particular chart I can follow up with you on, but, well, let's, FY 2025, we're drawing down 13.3 million. What are we drawing that down for?
So that is 9 million for CIP projects, and that include the HVAC, which is almost 3 million, 2.9 there. Public safety, 2.5 million, radios, facility security, and fire hydrants. And then parks, almost 1 million for turf replacement and the master plan, 200,000 there. We have 600,000 for concession stand at the schools. And in addition to that, the debt service, the annual debt service, that we have 3.7 million for that, and 875,000 for infrastructure maintenance. The 800,000 was added over a 3-year window, if you recall, to bring our maintenance of infrastructure, and fiscal year 24, 25, and 26. So we have one more year, and then 75,000 was added for the CIP manager. So.
Okay, so I think this is an area that needs at least more explanation to the public to understand how this is being managed and why it's being managed the way it is. Second point I want to make is growth is fine. It's a mixed blessing. Yes, it adds taxes. No, it adds traffic. yes, it may support new businesses, but the concern I have is that off-budget are things like the sewer, which is what, is that now up to 17 million, or it was 10, is it now 17? I don't know, for the full thing. And a fair amount of that is driven by growth. So I'm concerned about looking at these numbers and saying, well, growth is wonderful. If you look at in a vacuum, yes, it is. If you look at in a greater context of what infrastructure costs, what additional staffing costs, what additional, whether it be in the schools or the city, all I'm suggesting is a more careful analysis than just looking at these numbers, because there are things that growth is triggering, expenditures that aren't on this chart, and infrastructure is the first that comes to mind. That's more a comment than a question.
Your point is well taken.
Yeah, thanks. Going to the personal property tax for a minute, we had a discussion a year or so ago about valuation of motor vehicles, how it spiked up, and now I think it's settled down somewhat. Do we have, this isn't anything you need to resolve tonight, but it's something we need to take a look at to make sure that we're not at where the height of the inflation was on motor vehicles.
So this is something we're definitely going to have to revisit as part of the 26 budget, because it's not just the cost of the vehicles, it's also the number of vehicles we are adding with the development activity, and then also some backlog in the sense that people move in, move out, so all that cleanup has to happen. So with that, this increase was expected, but more like a one-time increase. I don't think we're going to add like total of 900 vehicles next year, unless, of course, the units that are going to be occupied are going to bring in that many vehicles. So we definitely want to visit this and map it against also the cost of the vehicles. There are some NADA reports that are coming out and projections that Tom and I were talking about, so that's going to be taken into account, yeah.
So one final question. So we have the unassigned fund balance, and we're maintaining the 17% target, and we're increasing as necessary. The capital reserve budget is being spent down dramatically for reasons which you've indicated. Are there any other sort of balances that we have as sort of there in place in case of something dramatic like 2009 or 2010? In other words, our total reserve money that we've got to cover a catastrophic macroeconomic or other event, what is that total number?
That is the 20 million number for the unassigned fund balance. The capital reserves are not something typically we use for catastrophic events, and those are to bring in capital projects to fruition. We do have a permit reserve, but that's to address the major project, the building and permitting activity, because those are typically multi-year projects. We collect the fees in specific intervals, and they don't get drawn down. A good amount is for staff, and then some amount is for technology and other things. So, but to answer your question, for an economic downturn, the place one would typically go to is either freezing your vacancies, like cutting your expenditures, or looking at unassigned fund balances.
Yeah, we lived through that. Yeah, it was unpleasant to say the least, and really. One final question. Is the 17% still the responsible target for the unassigned fund balance?
So given our policy, it is the right thing to do, and given our CIP that we'd be issuing some debt in the coming years, we should adhere to our policy. We are working with our financial advisors to look at this policy and see if there are any shifts in best practices out there, and we're going to bring it to council in November.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, I think everyone's gone, so I'm going to go next. So I actually do want to start on slide 9, which is, I think I actually had a pretty similar reaction as Mr. Snyder. So slide 9 looks scary, right? Because you're drawing down capital reserves. But I think what's actually would be a helpful slide, which is probably one of my favorites that you generally include, Ms. Bawa, is the stack chart that shows unassigned balance plus capital reserves, and then the 2 lines showing what we do need to do to stay within policy targets. I think those of us who've been up here for several years remember that we built up reserves because we had a big CIP coming up. But I think the intent is to stay at 5% or 3.75 million eventually. But I think over time, showing that chart is helpful because that's a less scary picture that shows we built it up for a reason, because we had a $120 million high school, an $18 million city hall, a $9 million library renovation. So showing that purposeful building up and then the drawing down to get us back to policy target is a good thing. Because at the end of the day, I think we all share the belief that we shouldn't be sitting on $30 or $40 million of taxpayer money if we can deploy that against critical community needs. So I would request that next time we add that slide, because I think that does give more context, which is I think what Mr. Snyder was asking for. My second question is on slide 6. So I know that you had said that BPOL we won't know until March 2025, but obviously there's some pretty aggressive targets in there since we're 7 days away from Q1 ending, and I know you never like to commit to how Q1's looking, but given that obviously we'll be setting budget guidance probably in about 3 months, how do we feel about these targets, and when is the best indication of when how will the FY25 targets feel?
So in Q1, the only thing that's going to become a little bit more clear is the personal property tax. And those are the bills that have been sent out. And
we're already ahead of schedule.
Yeah, and we'll bring that as part of Q1. We'll have sales tax data for a month or two, 1 month probably, July, because it's lagged by 2 months. We'll have meals tax data for 2 months. Insufficient data to draw any trends and also to account for any new development activity, because some of the businesses, the big ones like the Whole Foods and all, are yet to open up. So I don't expect even Q2 to have a whole lot of eye-opening data or trends, but the third quarter, which is going to feed right into the city managers, or maybe 8 months data that's going to feed into the city manager's budget proposal, is where we're going to see some activity in the revenues.
So all that to say, come December, when we're trying to give budget guidance, we'll have pretty imperfect data on local tax revenue, which is always the issue, right? Because we're kind of guessing what our best, based on the best information we have, and we probably won't even have a really good information until March 2025, right before the manager presents a recommendation.
We may have a decent indication of the real estate assessments, and that's pretty much it.
Okay.
And the personal property.
And that is like 65% of our revenues, luckily. Right. Okay. So then my next question is kind of dovetails to that. So if we can go to slide 13. So we've held kind of the general government budget pretty flat up until 2022, as you said, when our personnel expenses grew a lot. I think one of the comments several of us made when we were adopting the FY25 budget is making sure that our rate of growth is sustainable. So in light of some uncertainty in the broader financial markets, I think one thing that I asked when I was in Newbie 8 years ago was thinking about doing multi-year revenue forecasting and expenditure forecasting. So we've been really comfortable with a rate of growth of, frankly, 6 to 8%. And I think some of us probably worry that that's really not sustainable. So I do think it would be pretty prudent for us to think about what does a 3% growth look like? Because looking at that line right now, again, given where labor conditions are, I just think we're going to be in a pretty different environment. And I do think it's important to start managing expectations of a more modest budget season for several years out. So I know that's hard to do because you just told me how hard it is to forecast local sales tax data and local meals and whatnot until later on in the cycle. But I do think that in this upcoming budget cycle, it probably would be smart to start thinking about what a 3-year budget forecast looks like and what those numbers look like, and for us to internalize that and get comfortable with it.
A 3-year or a 3%?
Both.
That's just an Excel formula.
Yeah, because I think when we look at your 1, 3, 5-year averages, our budget growth in those previous years were much more modest. They were more like 3%, right? And so I just think that it would be good for us to look at what that looks like. And I guess I'll ask my colleagues for any reactions on that.
I totally support it.
I see head nods. So that's that on slide 13. Moving on to ARPA. So we didn't get a chance to talk about this in Budget and Finance, but I think what I understood from the report is that the staff recommendation for the unallocated $116,000 is likely the HVAC for the community center. Is that correct?
It could be that and some other funding too.
And then for the remaining $2.1 million for those items above, do we feel confident that the funds will be encumbered against those projects? Or are you looking for new projects or new input from council?
We're not looking for new projects. What we would be discussing with council is, we'll do an assessment of what are the projects that are in risk of being encumbered, not being encumbered by the end of the year, and shift those funding towards things that we know will be, so that happens smoothly. We will have all the funds encumbered by December 31st. That will happen. And we also will explore with the council this idea of support for the sanitary sewer fund. We'll go through some scenarios with council on that. That is an option. It's one that we haven't been recommending, but it's a good thought process to go through and then just make a clear-eyed decision on that. And we'll have good data for that as well, and an option.
Okay. So I'm hearing you will have a recommendation on how to encumber the $2.2 million in total.
That's right.
And we will not leave $2.2 million on the table by the end of it.
Oh, no, it's going to be part of the budget amendment if we need council action and moving funds across projects.
Okay, I'm going to get to sewer shortly. While we're on utilities, do we have an update on the state of that $9 million in stormwater funds that we were getting from the state?
So there are still some ongoing administrative things that we're working through on that. And so I don't have a report that I can give on that. But we are deeply engaged with the state staff on the expenditure of those funds. It was discussed in the context of greening of Lincoln, so we're already assigning it and deploying it, and we're just going through the rules with the state DEQ staff.
Got it, because I think there was also hope that if we got the state money, that would free up ARPA stormwater money, which then could be applied to other things. There was kind of a moving around of funds, but...
So the main administrative issue that we're working on is that this pot of funds that DEQ normally administers is a 50-50 match fund. When the General Assembly took action on this, it was not intended to require a 50-50 match. There's a disconnect there. We're working through an administrative solution to that, but that's what the issue is.
Okay. So moving on to sewers, I appreciated the detailed write-up in the staff report on both stormwater and the sewer fund, and in particular, because I don't think in the past we've gotten as detailed a report out on these separate funds. Refresh my memory. So we have two different kind of costs that we're paying for. One is a capacity purchase from Fairfax County that was planned for. That's for growth that we are anticipating. And the other is the flow equalization basin of $9 million or so, and that is to deal with this legacy I&I issue. Are we talking about how to fund both of those as part of this upcoming budget amendment process, or one or the other? Or because I know the staff report goes into a lot more details about availability fees, which is what developers pay for in the new hookups, right?
We do, and so we'll be talking both about the purchase agreement with Fairfax County. At the same time, we're talking about this budget amendment. Those two are kind of happening simultaneously, and so we'll be able to talk about the whole picture together.
Okay. Well, I know that there's often some misunderstandings about how the sewer fund is funded currently and how we're paying for these two big purchases, so I would encourage people to look at the staff report that you all spent time on. So thank you for that. I had one final question. I think that was it, actually. So thank you for the report and staying late again tonight, too.
Sure. Good night.
Okay, so now we're back to council requests. Actually, no, as part of the city manager's report, I think you had one more item. Is that correct, Mr. Shields?
We did. If I could turn it over to the city attorney, she wanted to give an update on COYA, on conflict of interest.
Thank you, City Manager, Madam Mayor, members of council. I think we have mentioned this before in public meeting, but I wanted to provide you a brief update on the work group formed by your three appointees, the City Manager, the City Clerk, and myself, for the purpose of strengthening the city's processes surrounding conflicts of interest. The work group has thus far had 2 meetings, and we have consulted with the executive director of the state's advisory council on conflicts of interest as questions arise. The goal of our work will be to develop a few protocols for employees and public officials that will offer them increased awareness of and support in assessing their potential conflicts when they take up a new item on behalf of the city. Each public official and employee will remain responsible for their own individual conflict assessments and their own reporting. But the protocols that our group helps to develop would strengthen the support of those individuals to think from the perspective of conflicts and to feel more comfortable asking questions. Relatedly, I had received a question about whether members of the Economic Development Authority who own commercial property might have a conflict of interest when considering an ordinance like the commercial parking ordinance, which does affect commercial property owners. Upon receiving that request, I asked EDA members to reassess their potential conflicts relative to the commercial parking ordinance. Each member did that and reported no conflicts exist. This review did cause us to realize that one property, 105 North Virginia, was erroneously mapped by the city as not being subject to a shared parking arrangement when in fact it was. That mapping issue would cause people to believe who looked at the map that the property at 105 North Virginia was eligible for parking reductions and benefited by the ordinance, but in fact it's not eligible to be benefited by the ordinance. So that explains why there was no conflict there. That does conclude my update this evening. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you for the update. How quickly is this checklist going to be implemented or recommended by, I guess, staff? It sounds reasonable to do a kind of self-assessment checklist if I understood the recommendation from the city attorney.
Yes. We don't have a timeline estimated right now, but it is something that can be done in relatively short order. So we will keep you posted. We don't have a timeline just yet on that item.
Okay. And then the second part of your update was that after assessment, there was no conflicts of interest on the EDA. So I think at the EDA meeting last week, there was not a new vote or new disclosures that were required.
Correct. Each person reported with the assistance of the staff liaison who helped them process the analysis. They each reported no conflict, and so there was no need to redo the recommendation to the city council on that commercial parking ordinance.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to 9B, council requests now.
Thanks. Madam Mayor, a couple things. I'd like to follow up with that last discussion. Recently, the city attorney provided us some guidelines elsewhere on avoiding even the appearance of conflict of interest, and that's a concept well known by federal employees and well known by professionals in various areas. And I hope that that will be a part of the recommendations that come from this working group. City attorney, is there further consideration of that?
So that, the appearance of conflict, we can certainly talk to council about this further, but that would enter into the arena, in my opinion, of policy, of public policy. And our objective is to ensure compliance with the Conflict of Interest Act, the statute, and to help that compliance, to support compliance in that area. Things that go beyond the statutory requirements, such, what you're just describing as appearances of conflicts, our group was not going to tackle that issue, but council could have a discussion about that, and we can see if policies could be developed around that subject. The one question that would need to get answered first is if such policies that go beyond what the state requires of individuals is preempted. In order to answer that, I'd have to do some digging into that area and come to you with an answer on that.
Thanks. Well, I guess I'm asking to come back with an answer on that.
Okay, I can do that.
Thanks. Also, for further council comments, some citizens came before us with with concerns in the greening of Lincoln Avenue. And at our last work session, I don't think there was going to be further action by the council, that it would move through 90% approval and then 60% and then 90%. I'm wondering, what's the process that we should follow with regard to trying to work with the citizens that have raised the issue and actually presented another approach to the park area?
So what we will always do in a project is respond to any citizen question or, desire for more information. What staff was asking for council concurrence with or consensus with is that the major design in terms of laying out what we're going to submit to VDOT for their right-of-way review, that's what the 60% plans are what drives their right-of-way acquisition part of any project process. So what I'm trying to say is that sort of major redesigns are beyond the scope of the work that we're doing right now. And what we submitted to council was we've presented plans to the community. We've had multiple walking tours and sitting down and talking with neighbors and considering other options. And what we presented reflected what we thought is our best distillation of the community input that we've gotten, along with compliance with the grant terms and other sort of basic policy objectives. And so taking up sort of a major redesign is what we're asking council to say. We're past that point now in the process. If there are individual discussions about, for instance, it was raised tonight about a retaining wall, then we ought to know more about that. What council was told and what we heard was that we're going to avoid retaining walls. And so if a resident says, you're taking out my retaining wall on a tree, we need to understand the facts on that and make sure that that detail is being worked out, because I think the project manager is trying to avoid that type of action. So those are the details that we would follow up on, but kind of a major redesign or coming in with new concepts, we were not prepared to do.
If I can follow up.
Ms. Underhill.
Just to follow up on that, from talking to residents and then also hearing what Tony had to say last week, it seems to me like the key issue is that Tony's saying that there isn't space available for what they're asking for. And what John presented to me and to City Council was showing that there is space for what he's asking for. And so I think what it comes down to is actually getting a detailed survey of that space, because it would be a shame if it turns out there was a ton of space and then but we weren't able to accommodate his request. But if there isn't space, then I think that, at least my understanding, they would understand. And so actually having the details that this can or cannot fit, but having those specific survey measurements done, maybe sooner than later. But if you would be able to pass along what John created was already passed along or sent to Tony, but if you could pass along the fact that 3 residents came to speak tonight.
Oh, certainly, we'll do that. And we can sit down and sort of go through numbers with people, and at this point in the design process, those numbers are pretty precise, and certainly we can have those discussions.
Madam Mayor, just to finish up on this, the whole intention here is to green Lincoln Avenue and to improve it for the citizens there and the citizens across the community. So if there are citizens who have taken the time to provide an alternative, made very rational arguments, for example, the use of the park and the removal of parking spaces for that, and I'm not specifically talking about any particular property, but it seems to me that that's a point of discussion that maybe more needs to occur to make sure that we're coming up with the absolute best design for that particular part of Lincoln Avenue, because that's the one that seems to have attracted the most controversy. So can we have a process in place to try to work through the alternatives that have been provided as well as the comments made so that we can, if possible, come up with a win-win in that particular area in the context of approving the overall plan?
I think if they're in the nature of details, sort of within the concept, yes. If they're talking about major changes to where face of curb is and width of sidewalks and things like that, we're trying to avoid that at this point. My understanding at Lincoln, one of the key points is the location of the marked pedestrian crossing. And that does have an impact on the on-street parking because you need to have clear zones on both sides of that pedestrian crossing. And that's, to me, I think that has been pretty well thought through in terms of what other alternatives are. But if there are questions about the location of that pedestrian crossing, we can certainly engage with people on that, explain to them why, the pros and cons of different locations, so that they understand what's driving that. That did have an impact on sort of, 3 to 4 parking spaces right there at the park.
Thanks.
Okay, other council requests? Ms. Connolly?
Some of these are related to public comment that we received that was not in the clerk's list, and I wasn't clear if it was just requests from people. There was one person who was requesting a police report based upon some emails that she'd received, and I just wanted to make sure she had gotten in touch with the police.
I followed up on that one, and
Yeah.
We did.
That one's taken
Yeah.
care of? Okay.
We have, that's right.
We got the CACT sent their report looking at the whole Oak Street walking neighborhood and doing a lot of work in that neighborhood, and I'm just wondering what's the next step with that report? Did we ask for that, or did they come up with that? I just wasn't sure where that came from. It seemed like it was kind of out of the blue, but had some good ideas in it.
I don't know the answer to that question, and we'll follow up on that.
Okay. Several people asked me about the farmer's market parking. I wasn't here this weekend, but I heard the parking lots were blocked, the non-city government parking lots.
Okay, I know that I'll try to find out and get to the bottom of that. I know there have been some discussions recently about that.
Right. So again, I wasn't there to see it, but it seemed like the public parking lots that we use were blocked. This is just an election question, which is, have we decided yet about the voting ward for the brand-new apartments in West Falls Station? They've never been in a voting ward before, so I'm curious about that. I don't think anyone's going to be living there before the election. There was a chance that they were going to be able to move in October 15th, but I believe it's moved to November 15th. But I don't think they're in a ward.
I'll check with the registrar on that.
Yeah.
I know he's been thinking about that and planning for it, but I don't know exactly what his determination on that has been.
And I'm wondering, too, about the redistricting they did. Did that fall into Senator Salim's district, or is it in another district?
And I can't remember exactly
I
where
can't either,
that line went. That's a good point. But when the registrar last did the redistricting, they were anticipating all the new residents at the West End, so I know that those forecasts were brought into their design of the precincts.
The ward map online actually shows them in Ward 3, so they do include that new little...
They're in Ward 3. And are they in Salim's, Senator, are they in the same district as the rest of us for?
Yeah, we'd
don't
have
know.
to check the
Okay.
senatorial maps for that.
Okay. And then my last question is just related to the weekly crime and crash report. I don't know who else reads them every week, but there seems to be a lot of crime, more crime than there used to be around here. And I'm just wondering how the police are tracking that, or do we know if there are certain neighborhoods where it just seems like there's a lot more human-on-human crime as opposed to what it used to be around here, which was smoking in an undesignated area. And
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with that characterization,
Yeah.
but we can certainly get the data and show what the trends are.
can we have a report on that data?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, other council requests?
I had two quick ones. I guess on the following up on the COIA discussion, I understand the city attorney's, concern that we wouldn't be imposing obligations that go beyond what Virginia requires. And so I'm not in any way asking for us to do anything or seeking, to impose legal obligations. But I do think that we talked about, for the agenda of the next GovOps meeting in October, to further kind of this discussion and, what it is that the board and commission staff liaison role would be in terms of flagging considerations sort of during setting of agendas and circulating agendas, and also during the appointments process, considerations that the appointments committee should keep in mind. You can have someone sitting on a board and commission, that is compliant with the law, but there can still be sort of spillover in terms of just, how many touch points that person has with other things going on in the business, in the city. And so it was a consideration in terms of how we might incorporate that in appointments committee into some of the questioning of, what appointments make sense to make. So continuing to think about those issues in the working group, I think would be helpful as well when it comes back to GovOps and for kind of the working group's continued consideration. And then the only other thing I had was that there was also a public comment about if you enter Broad Street from South Spring, what it means for the new traffic speed cameras. And is that problematic in terms of like notice to a driver that enters from South Spring and turns either way on Broad Street? Does a 20-mile-per-hour flashing during school times need to exist on South Spring for that person, to get picked up by the camera, for example? So can you just look into that and see, so long as the signage is on Broad in either direction entering in the zone, is that sufficient, or does there need to be something if you're entering into Broad, from a street and turning onto it in terms of what the mile per hour limit is? Okay. That's all.
Okay. Thank you for raising South Spring, because I was going to bring that up, since I have seen the new signs in my street and also the CACT's recommendations, which are very ambitious around Oak Street Elementary. And so I think I had the same process question as Ms. Connolly. It just, what do we do with it? What's next? Hopefully some of those things are paint and rapid response team items that staff can evaluate and determine if they could be done quickly. So while we're on rapid response, I know that I had sent in a council request to evaluate Lincoln and Oak, given that we already had a bike accident there several months ago. I received another request from the neighborhood that people keep running that four-way stop, and it's really picked up recently. And I wonder if it has to do with, because of the new stop signs at the W&OD crossing, whether people then just don't expect another one so quickly. But if we could ask for additional, maybe police enforcement attention at that four-way stop, the sight lines there aren't great. And I think the response from staff is, yes, we understand the sight lines aren't great. It's going to be addressed at Greening of Lincoln, which won't get implemented until next year. And so I really would hate to wait a whole year to have a pretty dangerous intersection where we already had one accident this year. So I would ask that the rapid response team look at solutions as well as extra police enforcement at Lincoln and Oak, that four-way stop. The other thing I wanted to follow up on is that I also sent a request about this, but I think we've gotten a public comment several months back, is the light at Virginia and Broad. The pedestrian signal is only 9 seconds. And so I've actually timed all the other ones. Broad and Washington is 23 seconds, Cherry is 17 seconds, even Reese Place is 17 seconds, which has very little traffic. I think Virginia and Broad, which was where we actually unveiled the new traffic box, might be an error because I could barely get across Broad Street in 9 seconds. So I had sent it in as a council request, but I do worry that this is just a hazard that we need to address sooner than later, given how short that PED timing is, and that's one of our busiest intersections in front of Broaddale Shopping Center. So that was it.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so now back to the agenda. I think we are now on TO 24-11, is that correct?
That is correct. TO 24-11, an ordinance to amend the zoning code of the City of Falls Church, Chapter 48, zoning, Article 5, supplementary regulations, Division 2, off-street parking requirements to exclude the first 1,000 square feet of individual commercial uses in off-street parking requirement calculations.
And the request tonight is for council to consider a motion to defer consideration of this to October 28th, 2024, and advertise a public hearing for that same date. The issue is providing additional time for the Planning Commission to make its recommendation on this ordinance. What this ordinance really is about, I'll just say it very briefly, is to provide some greater flexibility for older commercial office buildings when they're doing new tenants move in, to grant some greater flexibility for the parking requirements for those new commercial tenants in these older commercial buildings. We don't have staff here for this item tonight since the request is simply to defer, but if there are questions from council tonight, I will answer them if I can, and if I cannot, be happy to write those down and make sure that they're addressed in the staff report when it comes back to you on the 28th.
Okay. So we're deferring tonight because of the Planning Commission's schedule and moving this out. So do we have questions for staff on this one? Ms. Underhill?
We had discussed 1,000 square feet, 1,200, I guess a bunch of different numbers, and maybe this is for Sally if she's still around. Does it matter what number we go in with, and are we allowed to change it later? Or do we need to go in with a higher number so that we can change it lower later? Oh, it's a second reading. Oh, so there's no...
Yeah, this item's already been advertised, and so the number has been fixed at 1,000, but in my opinion, we do have some flexibility from that number.
Okay, so that doesn't need to be decided tonight?
No, it doesn't.
Thank you.
Can I just ask on that same question? So the staff report, in terms of the code language, has been revised over time, to have the different exclusions added. So, initial referral had certain exclusions, and it's coming back to us with the 20,000 square foot building site exclusion and whatever else. The staff report, the code language still says 1,000 square feet, despite, the different board and commission review that, as Ms. Underhill said, has been between 1,000 or 1,500 square feet for the recommendation. So when it comes back, can we just have clearer direction in terms of what the staff recommendation is as to that square footage, since it hasn't changed in the report? And I don't know, is that consistent with just where the city attorney is leaving it so that it's consistent with first reading, or does it have to go with the staff recommendation versus what the board and commission input has been?
Well, it's showing up in the ordinance at 1,000 feet because that's what the council voted on at first reading. And so staff doesn't change something unilaterally after the council has taken a vote on it on first reading. I think staff is interested in the Planning Commission's discussion on this, and so I think that you'll get a Planning Commission recommendation on it. And, staff, I think maybe we'll talk about what the staff recommendation is. I know we've had a little bit of back and forth on ourselves internally on it as well. So.
No, that's helpful, and I asked only because, like I said, in the staff report, it keeps it at 1,000 square feet, even though the code language, the redlined code language, does reflect further exclusions that have kind of been worked into the ordinance over time that weren't included in the first reading. So I didn't know, if it was the scope of the staff recommendation or if the exclusions were being added on, even though the 1,000 square feet was still up for whatever the final staff recommendation is. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get a clarification on that. I think I understand what you're saying.
Other questions or comments on this? In advance of deferring. Okay, I had two.
I'm sorry.
I had two, but before I open up for public hearing.
Okay, just wanted to remind you.
Thank you. No, I've been forgetting, so that's helpful. So one, which is, I think we just have typos in both the staff report and in the attachment. It is a letter of recommendation from the EDA, not the EDC, so those are separate bodies. I want to make sure that was corrected in both the staff report as well as the addition attachments. Second, the map. I think we had spent a long time staring at this map, and so given that we spent time talking about what's not eligible, i.e. shopping centers, 20,000 square feet, things that have parking management plans and TDMs excluding all the special exception projects. There's a lot that's not eligible. So is the map that is now attachment 1E, I think if I'm reading that correctly, is that accurate?
So let me get back with you on that.
Yeah. I guess I would just ask it because, obviously people can read the detailed ordinance to see what's excluded, but I think a lot of times people also rely on the map.
Yeah.
So I think that would be helpful to make sure.
And so I know it was noted by the city attorney earlier in the evening that the map could cause someone to be misled because, does it accurately show whether there's a shared parking agreement on some of these properties, as an example? And I don't know if this map has been corrected with that, but we'll make sure that it is as clear as it can be when it comes before you on the 28th.
Yeah, because I know there's also a lot of misunderstanding in the community. People just see that we're waiving parking requirements, and when you look at it, it's pretty incremental. So it's only those little orange boxes, and while obviously we need to be considerate of those parking impacts, those large boxes where we have mixed-use development already are not eligible. So I want to make sure that the public understands that. Okay, with that, do we sure.
I just want to ask a question related to the map because the ones down in Eden Center area, in the lower right-hand corner there, looks like, some of them are part of a shopping center and some of them aren't. And my question, if you look at those two little orange boxes, I don't know how they can't be part of a shopping center. I guess one could be a gas station.
Well,
I can't remember what they are, but they seem like shopping centers to me. So, following along.
What those are, that's where I walked without the sidewalk. That's the vet.
No, the vet's up a little, the vet is at the corner there. These are the ones kind of over by BJ's.
The reason that, from my understanding, the reason that they wouldn't be included, it's not because they're not a shopping center, it's because after our last work session, there was an additional exclusion for buildings that are over 20,000 square feet. So the tan buildings, would previously have been eligible. They weren't a shopping center, like the actual Eden Center shopping center, but they were previously eligible and then became ineligible because their gross square footage was over 20,000 square feet, which is why they're now light tan. And the remaining little orange ones are like separate parcels with different ownership that are under 20,000 square feet, which is why they would continue to be eligible.
Okay, because that little rectangle is a little shopping center.
Yeah, but the definition of the shopping center under the ordinance had to do something with like the acreage. Yeah.
So anyway, that just goes to Ms. Hardy's question of how are we figuring all this out?
Okay. Well, ideally, when it comes back to us, that this this is reflective of all the exclusions and is accurate.
Right.
Okay, so let's open it up for public comment on item TO 24-11. Anybody want to speak to this item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Do we have a motion?
I move to defer consideration of TO 24-11 to October 28th, 2024. Schedule a public hearing for that date and advertise the same according to law.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Underhill on the second. Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Sorry, Mayor Hardy.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, moving on to TR 24-33. Can we call that item, please?
Yes, TR 24-33, resolution to reestablish the Community Criminal Justice Board.
Is this,
Should I take this, Ms. Heath to introduce it?
Yes, your name is on it as the department head, so that.
Okay, thank you. This is Sally Gillette, the city attorney. I am presenting the resolution to reestablish the Community Criminal Justice Board, which is a board established with members from Arlington County and the City of Falls Church. 31 members, if I recall correctly. This type of a board is required for any jurisdiction that provides pretrial and or post-trial community-based probation services. So if a community has programs that provide alternatives to incarceration, this board is a requirement. Arlington and the city, my understanding is, created this board many years ago, and it maybe stopped being so active at some point. And so the effort here is to reestablish it as an active board that meets regularly. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know the city manager has also worked on this, and I know the mayor has worked on this, as well as Councilmember Hiscott, who's absent tonight. But you guys, you all saw this, I believe, at the work session, and so and there's only been a few minor changes since then. So I can take any questions along with the others in the group. Thank you.
thank you.
And I'll also note that the appointments to this committee that council makes are under the consent items with our regular appointments.
And they are just for the council representatives and the government representatives. We would still have a spot that we would advertise for the public.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Any questions on this resolution? Can I have a motion, please?
I move to adopt TR 24-33.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Flynn on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the consent agenda. We have a lot of appointments, including one to the BOE. Do we have anyone wants to remove anything or discuss anything on appointments or the consent agenda as a whole?
I'll move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
Ms. Flynn on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Okay. Any business not on the agenda or regional standing committee meetings?
Madam Mayor? Next Monday is the fifth Monday, and so we don't have a meeting, and we generally cancel the mayor's meeting on that date. It
This
hasn't been
coming
done.
Wednesday, you mean?
The Wednesday, 8:30 a.m.
Yeah, this coming Wednesday?
Yeah,
Yes.
so that works.
think we all agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No other business? Do we want to approve minutes next? We have November 2021 minutes.
I'll just say, like Councilmember Underhill, I normally vote on the minutes so long as a meeting that we've been a part of is included in the batch of minutes, but neither of us were on council for these two sets of minutes.
So I would like to abstain from that.
Same here. Thank you.
Minutes were ones when the meeting actually went till midnight.
This is the end of the historical minutes, you guys, so.
Okay. I guess for the remaining 3 people.
Can we just vote with 3?
Yeah, I'm sure, I mean, you can do a voice vote.
Okay. I sent a few little edits to the clerk, but with those tiny edits, I move to approve the minutes from November 8th, 2021 and November 22nd, 2021.
Second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
With two
And with 2 abstentions, please.
Thank you.
Any other business? Okay. Well, I move to adjourn then.
All right.
Night all.
Thank you, council.
Good night. Thank you.
I looked at Mary Beth, Senate District 37, and it includes that new area.
Oh, does it? Okay. Thank you.
Big. It's pretty big, district.